Good evening, everyone. I think we're live. Who have we got in the house? 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐷, Josh KK, hi. Kate, first time waffler. Oh, okay, welcome aboard. Mike, Barnaby, Richard, Joan, Sylvia, and all of Kittens. She does, she does. That would be telling though, wouldn't it? All right, Kate, good to see you. Evening, Tom, Jonesy, just got in from work. Oh, well, glad you could join us. It's really gratifying to have so many cool people tuning in to waffle and just shoot the breeze. It's bizarre, but very, very nice. Kelly, you gave the secret away. Okay, before we start the waffle, thank you to those who sent in questions. You guys never let me down. So that's Kelly, Josh, KK sent me some questions by email this week, which I'm going to talk about. And as usual, I encourage any other waffle questions, just type them type them in the comments, and I'll try to cover them as we go. True. So this week I've actually spent most of today updating the Rising Crane website, updating all the links and moving it to the online stuff. So if you guys want to check that out, risingcrane.co.uk or risingcrane.com will also find me. In addition to that, we've been setting up some community pages. Now, the first one, which we've just started, is for the online academy members. And that's where people, it's similar to Facebook, people can go in, chat, put links, put videos, put pictures, etc. But it's not linked to Facebook or social media. It's completely integrated into our online academy. Now, we're figuring this out, but the way I want it to go is use that as like our hub, our communications hub, and it's great, all the wafflers as well, and the nuggeteers, and there's a nice little community of people. So I'm trying to get one set up, not just for the online academy members, but for any kind of Rising Crane fan or anyone that wants to get involved. So eventually there'll be two, the kind of inner sanctum, if you like, for the actual members, and then the other one where I will be happy to say hello and get involved with that as well. So that would be a nice social group. So that's my plan for this week. What do we have? Hi everyone. Hi Kim. Side effects from jab, headache. Oh dear. Sorry about that. Jonesy, you mentioned once that you changed some of the 4 fundamental punches. Which ones and why? Okay, yeah, we'll go over that. Not me, my Sifu. I can go over that. Just giving you guys just a chance to type in anything or any more questions before we start going through it. How many do we have in the house? 13 people. 6 likes. If you guys who haven't liked, just don't mind hitting the like. It helps to push the channel out to people. Also, what would really help is if you guys share the links. Now, after next week, however, I'm going to be explaining this. After next week, these links will not be publicly posted anymore, and they'll be posted inside the Thinkific site. So if you want to continue with the waffles and the nuggets, you have to not Thinkific, I'm sorry, Patreon. So if you guys want to get involved in the nuggets and the waffles, it's on the Patreon, which is we've got membership from £4 or £3 a month, which is about $5 to our American friends. A lot of you guys are already on there, so that's not making a difference. But as we progress, I've done a lot of these ones free for the lockdown, but we're going to be moving it into the member site. But it's very, very affordable. Price of 1 cup of coffee a month, and you get all 12 videos every month. Right, I think it's time to crack on. There's no more questions coming in. I'm actually going to start with Jones's one because it's the easiest. My Sifu's father had 14 fundamental punches, and my Sifu had 2 punches that he used a lot in real fighting, which is 𝐒𝐡𝐚𝐧𝐬𝐿, so he swapped those around from the 𝐒𝐴𝐻𝐿, which is the kneeling stance, and the 𝐵𝐴𝐻𝐿 𝐵𝐴𝐻, the reverse cranesman, because he felt, although they were good techniques, they weren't representative for him of our kind of bread and butter techniques. So we have 𝐵𝐴𝐻 𝐵𝐴𝐻 𝐿 it used to be 𝐿 𝐶𝐻 so that was a slight difference. The 𝐵𝐴𝐻 𝐿 are still in the set, so there's no, you're not missing anything. But I think it's better to train the 𝐶𝐻 more in the basics, because they are, particularly because we do free fighting, and those of you that do MMA, it's the overhand and the hook punch, so they're kind of bread and butter. So that's why he did that. Right. Other questions? So I need to refer to my emails. One from Kelly, which was Feng Sung, the word sung. Interested in what sung means. Why is Feng Sung so important? Are there more Feng Sung Gong that we can do? Reason is I do the ones in the warm-up most days, regardless of what other training I do, because it really helps with stiffness and promotes relaxation. Okay, so that's in our academy, but for those of you that are not familiar with these, song is a term used a lot in the West. Oh, coach or Sifu, which is more? That's a good question, Jonesy. I'll come back to that one. Let's talk about Feng Sung. Okay, so I think Tai Chi, because the West's first exposure to Tai Chi probably was a teacher called Chen Manqing, who was from Taiwan, who moved to New York, and he had a student who wrote books, and so it kind of popularized it. So a lot of what he talks about has become very accessible in the West, and so people tend to think of that as being kind of representative of all Tai Chi, but actually not. It's actually not. So he uses the term Feng Sung a lot. Now, my teacher also talks about the importance of Feng Sung. So Sung means loosen, relax. So it can mean, depending on the context, it can simply mean flexible. If someone's they're stiff. If they're Sung, they're flexible. But it also means loose. So when they say, oh, and also it can even mean mentally. So in Cantonese, they say, oh, Feng Sung dealer, just like chill out, hang loose, chill out. So it's got the idea of just loosening. Why is that important? Because in martial arts, you have 2 things, yin and yang, okay? Tension and relaxation. Evening, Sally. Tension and relaxation, hard and soft, yin and yang. Now, in the early books in English that were written about Tai Chi, they really, really, really emphasized the song part and not the gan or ngan part, just the soft part. The idea was like the Tai Chi was the ultimate softness. So like where everyone somebody put any pressure on you, just melted away. It's a complete kind of jelly sort of blancmange, whatever, as if the ultimate is soft. And okay, so that's maybe true if you're talking about defense, but if you hit somebody, you need to be hard, you need to have power. So I think the meaning in Tai Chi specifically of Sung is when you have a posture. So for example, a lot of the time we have tension, but the tension is, we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, in the connective tissues. And the structural frame itself, the alignment of the bones, the tension in the connective tissue forms this kind of intrinsic strength. So again, they say, oh, inner strength, inner power, but it's the same terminology that an engineer would understand, of like the stresses and strains and forces and so on. So it's not talking about anything particularly mystical. Now, once you've got that intrinsic strength, you have to let go of any excess muscular tension. That will inhibit the release of energy, the Fa Jing, right? So you want to have, in a Chinese medical terms, you have the flow of energy, and then the muscular stiffness is like you've got a hose pipe, and then the muscular stiffness is like you have a kink or block in the hose pipe. You want to keep it relaxed and open. You want to keep the energy flowing, hence the emphasis of looseness. Okay, are there any more Feng Song Gong that we can do? Well, really, I put what I consider to be the best ones in the warm-up on the academy. So they're very simple, and it's you know, lots of different ways of shaking out, relaxing, and releasing tension. So if you watch animals, they pandiculate and then they shake off tension, and this is like releasing the tension from the nerves and kind of loosening off the muscles. So this is really what you want to be doing. And I think maybe you don't need so many exercises. You need like a lot of repetitions, I think is the best. So is there more? Not really. I mean, it's shaking off every part of the body and then pandiculating and stretching every part of the body and then loosening. Of course, if you want to reach deeper and deeper levels of song, the way to do that is through qigong, through standing meditation, and then progressively dissolving. So like in the Taoist practice, they talk about dissolving everything to be like water. So wherever you have tension, you're softening and using your mind, using your consciousness and releasing tension. That's the first stage. And then you dissolve the water into steam. So it just sublimates or just expands. So you have the sense of expanding and opening. And this goes really deeply. I mean, they talk about, in the Taoist tradition, they talk about relaxing your internal organs, your heart, liver, kidneys, spleen, so on, so that you're feeling very deeply tension released on very, very deep levels. And this does actually give control of some of the autonomic nervous system. So there is some scientific basis to it. Again, I'm sharing information for interest. This is just sharing information. I'm not putting myself out as a Taoist sage or anything like that. So just take it for what it's worth. I've read a lot of books on the subject, and you know, my teacher has some insight, but you know, we're not training to be Taoist priests. We're Kung Fu and Tai Chi practitioners. So what else? Really helps with stiffness and promotes relaxation. Totally. I think that's answered that. I think hopefully. Intrinsic strength, then hang loose. That's right. It's like yin and yang, right? So you must have that balance. So really good Kung Fu and Tai Chi is a kind of Kung Fu, right? So really good Kung Fu has to have hardness. It's not just like a limp noodle, and it mustn't be stiff, mustn't be tight. So it has this kind of alternating hard and softness about it. When you're doing Tai Chi, you're opening, closing, and contracting, expanding, Qi's coming out, Qi's going into the spine. One way, another good model of that, if you imagine one of those old coat racks, you know, that you used to be able to buy with like a feet at the bottom and hooks on the top. So you have this coat rack, and then you hang your coat on it. The coat rack is your postural frame, and your muscles should be like that coat hanging on that rack. If you use that kind of feeling, the coat is just, but the frame itself mustn't collapse. So what was I talking about last week on my Sifu's fan? Relaxed and not broken. Yeah, tense but not stiff. Those were these kind of yin and yang things. Okay. Kate, I never punched anything or anyone. Fair enough. Is it important for Tai Chi to train realized punches with a bag? I'm not advocating street fighting, to understand the sense of hitting resistant mass. It depends, Kate, why you're training. It's a very good question, thank you. It depends why you're training, what you're training for. If your interest is self-defense, let me just fast forward, this song is a bit, okay. If your interest is self-defense, you have to hit things. You can't practice slowly punching in the air and then it translating. However, if you're practicing Tai Chi for relaxation, for health and so on, and you don't want to hit anything, you don't need to hit anything. But yeah, if you really want to understand martial art, you have to understand that hitting an object. So, and I'll explain this to you. You said the sense of hitting resistant mass, which is a really nice way of putting it. It's resistant in the sense that it's, you know, it's stopping your hand. So you need to understand how to get your energy into a target and at a specific depth as well. So depending on the technique, you know, if you go too deep, it's like a push. If you go too shallow, it doesn't do the damage. So you have to understand how to have depth into your striking. But it's not a resistant mass in one sense, is that it's not hitting you back. So you can get very, very good at hitting a bag, and that might not translate into hitting a person that's punching you back. So there's a difference there. There's an optimal way of hitting a stationary object, and there's an optimal way of hitting something that's moving around as well. So there's levels to this. And again, depending on how far you want to take it. The kind of Taiji that I'm teaching in the academy is not designed to be a self-defense prep. There's lots of aspects to self-defense that I don't cover. The mental side, the sparring, the resistance part of it. I will be doing those kind of courses though, once we're out of lockdown and we can do partner training. And I can show you ways that you don't have to go too crazy. You don't worry about getting injured and so on. You can still develop some functional skills. So there are ways to do it. The key is play fighting. That's a little hint. Boards don't hit back. Exactly. So, did I miss a question? Jonesy's got some more questions. Okay, I'll come back to your next question in a minute, Jonesy. You said I can't understand why it replaced Guai. Guai is the kneeling stance, not Guai. Guai tung. So it's the same punch as the geekiness, just done in a kneeling stance. Hence, it's perhaps a little redundant because it's the same technique. It's not a different hand technique. It's just the same technique but done in a kneeling stance. So yes, very practical. But you practice the punch, you practice the kneeling stance. Chong Fong Pao is hard to get my head around in terms of actual use. Again, we're talking about Feng Sung. We're talking about loose. You were talking about the mobility of the entire shoulder joint. Chong Fong Pao is an excellent exercise for that. And I will show you some actual practical uses of it. But that one, Chong Fong Pao and Goi Deng Pao, are both more exercises, structural exercises. Next question, coach or Sifu, which is more appropriate nowadays? What do you think of the difference? That is a can of worms question. That is a can of worms question. It's a very, very difficult question for me to answer because I learned in one culture and I teach in a different culture. So my general approach to this, or has been, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but my general approach has been to let the student decide if they want to Sifu, it's my responsibility. If they want to be a coach, if they want to coach and don't want the cultural side of it, especially if they're a member of a school, like a paying member, and they're coming to learn self-defense or MMA and they don't want to get involved in that side of it, perfectly right. The martial arts as it's taught in the West is all about ranking, seems to be belts and degrees and so on. In China, it's always more about a relationship, like a family tree, brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts. And so Sifu is like the character, Fu is father. So in the family tree, it's the next generation. So that's what that means. It's the one generation up. But it does have a lot of responsibility as well. So both ways. My Sifu, when I first went to China, didn't do the Baisi ceremony. He didn't do it. It wasn't part of him. He thought it was like a little bit outdated. And then when he got older, he changed his mind and he started taking in Yapsat Todai, like more apprentices. And I was happy to do that. But I wouldn't expect everyone to or want to, and that's cool. Otherwise, it's some kind of power trip by the Sifu, and that's a problem. So it's a difficult one. It's a fine line for me. I struggle with it. Having said that, coach, I was an MMA coach for a long time. Now, I don't like what coaches have become either. Coaches seem to be like these kind of babysitting and then rah-rahing the students, and you've got to motivate them. You've got to do this and that. It's very different. That's like the American culture that's come into it. Like, you're a good coach, meaning you have to get your student up and then come on and push harder and work harder and all that. Whereas in Kung Fu, that stuff has to be intrinsic. And the stuff about coach and I did courses on coaching and so on, and I come to the conclusion that I'm not a coach in that sense, right? Even though I coached fighters, because I want the students to. I suppose it's different when you have professional fighters or whatever. It's different. I was coaching amateurs, so. But I think the coach, in the sense that the term is used in America, and students, after watching a lot of MMA stuff, they kind of want that. Yeah, I don't want to go down this one because I have some issues around this. I had some experiences around this, which wasn't so good, and that made me think maybe we need to bring Sifu back for the cultural reasons, for the values. Okay. Kate, thank you, Sifu. Sorry, yeah, no problem. Mike, same for me. Oh no, did you guys miss all my waffle? I'm going to answer Fu Zhao's questions next. If there was any bits you guys missed, please put the question and I'll cover it. Fu Zhao question. Okay, so some of this you need to understand. So I'll read the questions and then first one, Fatzi origins. Was it first a mudra? If so, any other martial mudras that you could talk about, and why the index finger? Okay, we can talk about that. Any thoughts on activation of the 𝐿𝐵𝐿 improving martial ability? That's, for those who don't know, that's the 8th point on the pericardium meridian for you acupuncturists. Discussion of martial psychology, emotional states, control of self, provoking them in others, 5-element theory with a mental bridge. Carry over to dealing with everyday situations. So these are big questions. Thank you. I'll start with the Fatzi. This is not relevant to the Taiji people, but in the southern styles we have what we call Fatzi, which is this finger technique. In the 𝐿𝐵𝐿 it was used more like pointing, and this is more for training the bridge arm. Now, the story I heard, you must understand that these traditions are oral and passed down in families, and so different families have different stories. And I would never stand there and say that another family or story is wrong, because it's like a mythology. Some of this is more like a mythology. If something's a historical claim or a scientific claim, that's different. It could be flat out wrong. We have to follow the evidence. But some of these stories, I don't know. But story as I understand it, when the troops were trying to fight against the Manchurians, so you were trying to restore the Qing, yeah, or get rid of the Qing, restore the Ming. I think that was the original intention. So there was a little saying they used to say, if every one of us, if all the Chinese just lifted one finger, we can get our country back. So the idea was, let's all just do one little thing, lift one finger. I feel that now, actually, I have to be careful what I say because I'm going to China soon, but with the totalitarian stuff that's going on over there now, you just think if everyone would just lift one finger, they could get control of their country back. So that was one of the meanings of this. So when they say one finger controls China, it doesn't mean, oh, my Kung Fu is so good that I can control the entire country with my finger. It means if there's enough of us and we all lift one finger, we can make a difference. That's how it seemed to me. So that's one possible interpretation of that. Mudra, possibly. Any other martial mudra? Well, there are postures in the 𝐿𝐵𝐿 which you see, which, for example, the monk begs for rice, the lohorn, the baifat. There's a number of these which you see on the old Buddhist statues. So these may well have been mudras, and there's certain hand positions you see in Tibetan Buddhism and in yoga, and may have a carryover into martial arts. I'm not going to say specifically on that. Okay. Next question. Any thoughts on activation of 𝐿𝐵𝐿 improving martial ability? So the 𝐿𝐵𝐿 is this, let's say, this 8th point on the pericardium meridian. In Chinese medicine, opening this point, for example, if you have heart fire, which is a pathology in TCM, heart fire may be manifested with doesn't just mean heartburn, like we would call it. It may be things like insomnia, where because the heart is the resting place of the Shen, of the spirit. So when the heart fire, you can't rest, you can't calm yourself down. So you need to get rid of that fire. And this is one point where it can exit. When we do this kind of palm, this is how you open the 𝐿𝐵𝐵𝐵 point. You make this shape, which is sometimes called a roof tile, because the water runs along the roof tile. So this is the roof tile palm, and this is for activating this 𝐿𝐵𝐵𝐵 point. So for Chinese medicine there's certain points where qi can enter and leave the body. The 𝐿𝐵𝐵𝐵 point, the 𝐿𝐵 point on the soles of the feet, which for those of you who want to look that up, that's the first point on the kidney meridian. So those are the kind of, they sometimes call those the 4 gates, although there are other 4 gates in acupuncture, it's to be confusing. But so for healing, for qi projection, etc., etc. Martial arts, martial ability. You know, what's the relationship between qi projection and martial ability? Because I'm not an advocate of, how shall I say this, projecting qi in qigong terms doesn't translate to be able to throw someone back with your energy. That stuff is fake, to put it bluntly. Mostly is compliant hypnosis and tricks and stunts and things that people do, that kind of stuff. So using qi in a fight is more talking about using your body efficiently, having everything connected. So having a type of power that is very practiced, very loose, relaxed, but coordinated. So it's efficient. Biomechanically, I agree. Oh, cool. There's so many videos out there of this stuff being exposed, and there's not a single video of someone going into an MMA cage and doing it, which would be a fair test, right? In fact, it would be the only test, really. So, where was I? What was I saying? Martial ability. Maybe because of its point about, trying to think of the word now, biomechanical efficiency. So if I'm hitting and it's not on center, my forces are scattered. If I can line everything up correctly, then my force is most efficient. Okay, so that's an example where there is a carryover. But that will also come just from hitting bags a lot, because you get more and more accurate. Your force generation will become accurate, but it's just not as cool or mystical sounding, right? Martial psychology, from emotional states, control of oneself, pranking them others, 5-element theory. This is, again, a big subject, and some of it I won't talk about on YouTube because it's like it's less than pleasant, shall we say. The 𝐒𝐡𝐚𝐧𝐧𝐞 idea about the mentality of fighting is not very pleasant. And people like to have this idea, you're doing martial arts, and if you ever got into a real fight, most people would just freeze or wet their pants or something, because they're not. You have to be exposed to violence. Now, I was brought up in an area where it wasn't a rough neighborhood. I didn't get into fights when I was a kid. I used to watch kung fu movies. I was very head in the clouds. And that's very different from some of my teachers that were brought up at the time of the Cultural Revolution. There was like fights to the death. There was bad things going on, and people had a very, very different relationship to violence. They weren't learning kung fu to learn how to fight. They had to fight. That was their survival. They were learning kung fu for other reasons, controlling their body, for improving their fighting, for learning some tactics. If you take someone that's cowardly and weak and doesn't know how to fight and has no kind of bravery, whatever, and then you teach them a whole bunch of techniques, they're still the same person. So there has to be a transformation of the character, and that usually comes from being, immersed in that culture, in that violence. The closest we could get is MMA competitions in my school. That's as close as I would want to go. I've heard of some of the 𝐒𝐡𝐚 schools sending their students out to get into street fights, and then the teacher watching it and then giving them feedback and then going back again. And after like 40, 50 fights, they were very tough. They were very good. That works. But people don't like the sound of that. They much rather talk about, Qigong and so on. But you have to understand that everything has 2 sides, the dark side as well. So that's one part of it. I'd say a little bit about the mentality, though. In the Cantonese, we call tan. And that's not so much it's not anger. It's not like it's not a completely losing control. It's more like a kind of a cruel, kind of calm, like a kid pulling the legs off a fly, kind of just, it's that kind of not just no, somebody grabs you and then you say, right, this technique is you poke them in the eye and you grab their groin, and most people would be like squeamish or be like, well, I don't want to do that. But it's having that utter, just ruthless intent without succumbing to rage or anger, where you lose your coordination and you lose your cool. So that's what that means. That's my comment on that. Five-element theory with a mental bridge force personality. I'm not sure. I don't see the five-element theory. You can apply it to anything, absolutely anything, for sure. So five-element theory, as it talks about emotional states, is each of the elements has an associated with spirit in Chinese medicine. So the fire, which is the Shen, for example, again, that's the consciousness, the spirit. The liver, which is the wood element, which is the Hun, that's more like the Westerns would use the word soul, perhaps. The lung is called the Po. Emotion-wise, the lung is grief, the liver is anger, the heart is joy. The kidneys, which is the j is like the willpower. Okay, the willpower. So that's the water element. So you can talk about that, having the water element. The dam, which is the gallbladder, which is also wood, is bravery, because they say ya dam yi lik san gong fu. Okay, one is bravery, second is power, third is technique. Which element did I miss? Fire, water, metal, earth. Earth is stomach and spleen, and that may be translated as something like worry, or possibly in a flip side, maybe something like sympathy, compassion, maybe. No, compassion's a bit more. This is more of a kind of an emotional response. It's hard to translate. But can you see how some of this stuff it's tenuous when you try to use it in English? Like when we say, "len gao dam," means like you're not brave enough. Literally means you don't have enough gallbladder. Okay, you don't have enough gallbladder, and you'd say that's complete nonsense. But in English, we'd say, well, you don't have guts. In some areas in England, they say you don't have any bottle. It's a turn of phrase. So if you get too kind of take it too literally and you try to map it onto fighting, you can be like these people that spend all their time studying this stuff for fighting and learning about all the energy points and acupoints and this and this. And it's just fascinating. That's kind of why I'm doing these waffles, because I like talking about this stuff. It's cool. But if you think that's going to be much use if somebody goes to mug you, I'm very skeptical. You're much better off just training your power, your sparring, your cardiovascular endurance, etc., etc. So that's my feeling about that. This is a bit one-sided waffling, guys. Give me some feedback or questions. I hope that was kind of useful and I answered everybody's questions. I think that's everything. I am happy to go over some more of this sort of medical theory. You're welcome. Some of this medical theory and going over it with people within the context of it's a waffle and we're sharing information for interest without making claims about relationship and carrying over to fighting. So I think there's some problems with that. You mentioned last week that you consider traditional hot guard technique as a speciality for free fighting use. Sandar type fundamentals first, yeah. Interesting though that the gut has more serotonin than the brain. There's some really interesting stuff coming out now, Kelly, like just some really, really interesting stuff. And the connection of the vagus nerve between the brain and the intestines. And there's some really interesting things. And some of it absolutely maps onto the TCM stuff as well, which is crazy. That equally applies to many Kung Fu styles, which is why the university problems of Kung Fu people trying to apply their art. I'm going to give you what I consider to be the answer on this, Jonesy. It's my personal opinion, right? But honestly, this is just backed by many fights, much coaching and many things. So look at it this way, right? You mentioned it last week that you considered, I'm just quoting you, traditional hop guard technique a speciality for free fighting. Okay, what do we mean by that? If I say, okay, the first thing we're going to use is this, then a round kick, people will say, oh, that's just kickboxing. But 𝐒𝐻𝐿 has this and a round kick. So when I say traditional hop guard is a speciality, what I mean by that is the techniques that you find in hop guard that are not generic. But there's a lot of generic techniques in hop guard. So all these different styles of Kung Fu, there's a huge overlap. There's 80% of generic techniques, 20% of specialized techniques. Now, the thing about Chinese martial artists is they all want to be special, which means it's not enough to hit the person. They have to use the technique from their system, which nobody else has got. That's the problem. If nobody else has got it, there's a reason for that, right? The stuff that works is common amongst styles. Okay, so what I mean is not to concentrate on the stuff that looks like spectacular, but concentrate on the bread and butter stuff first. And yeah, Sandar type fundamentals is what? Front kick, round kick, side kick, all is 𝐒𝐻𝐿. Jek choi, ngao choi, pao choi, cup choi, all is 𝐒𝐻𝐿. So that's kind of what I meant by that. One thing is slightly different is the fact that your defensive circle is narrowed. Because when you're in the cage, you're not worried about whether there's multiple opponents. You're not worried about whether the guy's pulling out a weapon or something like that. So it makes sense rather than having such a wide defensive kind of exposure to tunnel vision a little bit, because then you can bring all your defensive movement into place. Like in boxing, if you stood in boxing in such a way that you could defend kicks, in other words, you kept that front leg light and you picked your knee up and you didn't sit on your jab, you would lose a boxing match. So what you have to do is you say, right, I don't need to worry about being kicked, therefore, and then that changes the way you do it. So now I'm free to adapt my technique. So the less things defensively you have to worry about, the more you can concentrate on a few things, right, in isolation. Don't know if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is, if there's no kicks, you can do it a certain way. If there's no takedowns, you can do it a certain way. As soon as you add kicks and takedowns, you can't punch like a boxer anymore. It looks more like 𝐒𝐻𝐿. But if there was multiple people, if there was a complete, so if you look at a melee type of fight, multiple opponents, you'll see footwork, you'll see chong fong pows, you'll see triangle stepping. It will look a lot more like 𝐒𝐻𝐿. And then because you're not having to worry about these things, you can narrow it in, you can make it a little bit more defensively tighter. It makes sense to keep your hands up. Okay? If you're fighting with weapons and knives, and this isn't really relevant. So that's kind of what I meant by that. I hope that answers the question. This applies to many Kung Fu styles where the universal and Kung Fu people trying to apply their art. So yeah, that's what I mean. They're trying to apply the wrong bits. They're trying to apply the kind of speciality moves, which I'm not saying they don't have use. They have use, but they have use in a narrow field rather than the ones that are most useful and most practical. Barnaby, more a mental state under stress as affected by martial arts training. Well, hopefully what happens is that you're simply used to dealing with pressure. So we can have this kind of idea that we do our Tai Chi and we enter this quiet state, or we do our sitting meditation or a Qigong and we enter this quiet state, and we can enter this quiet state at will. Then someone comes along and tries to punch you in the face, and suddenly that's all goes to pot. And it's the same thing when you see these so-called spiritual people that are all like, oh, goodness and light and this and that, and then they're screaming at their kids or their husband or their wife, and they're in their normal day-to-day life, they completely lose it. So it's easy to do that when there's no resistance, right? When someone's trying to fight you, it's really, really difficult. Whereas someone that's been exposed to it a number of times doesn't lose their composure, can remain calm, can make correct choices and so on. So that's more of a matter of, what's the word? exposure. You can do incremental exposure. So the way I would do it, or the way I did it with my fighters, is we would say, okay, to start with, you've got to, I get the person standing with their back to the cage wall and just having someone throwing punches and kicks, because to begin with, they're going to do this. If you're doing this, forget it. You can have beautiful martial art technique. If you flinch, it's over. You can't do it. So first you overcome that. You're seeing stuff coming towards you and you're keeping your composure. You're used to things narrowly missing you. And then you get used to things actually making contact with you and not going and fighting back, but having that. So that would be the first stage before anything else. And then sparring, you need to gradually up the intensity. As soon as it starts to fall apart and turns into like a mess, you dial it back, but then you gradually. When I have a student, or when I had a student who could remain under composure and make the correct decisions and defensively look after themselves on the feet, on the wall, on the ground, top, bottom, and could transition between those movements, then what I would do is, and then sparring with harder sparring in the classes, then I would usually put them up for what we would call a gym show or an interclub. That's when they go to another club. It's a bit more competitive. You've got your team, they've got their team, and you don't know the person. So there's like quite a bit of adrenaline going on, and then try that. And usually after about 2 or 3 of those, they can maintain their composure. And then we would try an amateur MMA match. And then, you know, as they progress, there's more pressure, there's more, you know, it's more difficult. So that's how we would do it. That's how I would do it in my school. I don't believe there's another way. The traditional way would have been the same thing, except there's no referees, they're going out and getting into fights. So if people say the traditional way is better, okay, but really today, in this day and age, and the worst thing you can do is to not do any kind of that stuff and just do the qigong, or say, but I know this is going to work for me in a real fight. Maybe you have some confidence, maybe it helps you in your day-to-day life, but what happens? What happens when you get attacked and you haven't put the rounds and you haven't put the sparring and you haven't got the timing, you haven't got the reactions? You're going to get you're going to feel like you've wasted a lot of time if your goal is self-defense. Right. That music got a bit ominous there, didn't it? So that's my answer to that, Barnaby. Affected by martial arts training is the difference between losing it and maintaining your composure and making good decisions in split-second timing. That's what I would, if we talk about real fighting, it's that. I noticed a Chai Li Fa. Do you use that dummy form? I did learn the Chai Li Fa dummy. I've learned lots of sets over the years, Janji. I mean, I've what we call Moshak Gaolao. Moshak Gaolao is when you meet a friend, you have a certain skill in a certain art, and you make a friend that has a certain skill in a different art, and you say, hey, you teach me that dummy set, and I'll teach you this spear set. So it's a kind of a friendly exchange. My Sifu did that. My Sifu is such an amount of knowledge he can do. Like, for example, all of the Wing Chun forms and dragon style and the praying mantis, and he's just an encyclopedia of Kung Fu. Right, so there's nothing wrong with that if you have your basis and you have your core style. The problem is when people just do bit of this, bit of this, bit of this, and then not really any strong fundamentals. Now, I would just look at dummies the same way as punch bags. So if there's okay, I'm going to do it backwards, right? So rather than saying I'm learning a form and then I'm trying to work out the applications of the form, I didn't have that approach at all. I do the opposite of most people. I'd be sparring or fight it, and then something, I need a way to train this movement, right, effectively. How do I train this movement? So we have say a Wing Chun dummy where we've got 2 arms at the top. No, but I need something I can do this with. So it's more like there's a problem and you're using the dummy to train something. So in the same way as you'd use a punch bag. So I wouldn't get hung up on Wing Chun dummy, Chai Li Fa dummy. My Sifu would just go, use a tree, you know, here's a branch, you know, use it, you know, hit it, different angles and so on. So that's my answer. Barnaby, need real acclimatization rather than overconfidence. Yes, that's right. But we have an inherent problem, don't we, Barnaby, that you can never be really acclimatized to a real fight. You know, when someone's pulling a knife or something like that, it's never going to be the same. So what do you do? And even when you're very, very good, there's still a chance you're going to get killed. So if you're going out and racking up experiences, you're going to be getting injured. So we're onto a loser, really. And we need to be honest, and we need to train as real as we can get. So, for example, can an approach and simulate as well as possible? Yeah, exactly. It's all about simulation. And so here's the thing. Now, here's how I approached it. And again, it's different to other coaches, right? So they may or may not agree with this. You do the whole thing, it's dangerous, you get injured. So what you do is you say, right, we're going to simulate this part of it, but we're going to have this as a safety measure. Okay. So let's say, for example, we use a soft knife, but we're going to simulate the aggression and the reality of a sharp knife so that you're used to that kind of. And so your opponent's not just holding their arm out for you, but they're resisting and so on. I did a lot of knife work with Burton Ritson in Hawaii, so props to him. A lot of his approach I've used in my system. Let me just turn this. Okay, so that's the first thing, but we need a safety thing. So with a knife, it's easy. You use a soft knife. Okay, so now you have the reality of the movement, but of course, psychologically, you always know that's a soft knife. That's not going to kill me, so it's not the same. So then you can use something else, like they've got those shot knives we were talking about, which are like cattle prods. Now you're like, ooh, there's adrenaline, you know. Then you can do things like adding red syrup to the mix. So now it's slippery and it's hard to grab the wrist and it's like horrible. And that's simulating what would happen with the blood and so on. So you can't simulate everything at once because then it would be dangerous. So I do the same thing with my MMA stuff. We would take one aspect and make this like really, really intense. Like say you're throwing a cup choy and you really want to feel like full power cup choy and your opponent's got to defend it. So you say, right, it's coming, bam. Now they can defend it and you can throw it full power, 100% because they know it's coming. If that got them and they weren't expecting it, that's a knockout, right? So you have the safety factor, which is I know what's coming. And then you have the reality, which is 100% speed and power. You can never have, if you imagine two different dials, one is power and one is resistance, you'll never have those two turned up to 10 in training. So you might have a 10 and a 0, or a 0 and a 10, or a 5 and a 5. And so, and by varying the types of training, different intensities, different resistance, and different power, you're used to it, and you'll gradually learn to put them all together, which is what happens on the fight night. In the absence of shot knife, yeah, exactly. Kate, in the absence of classes, group dynamic, social aspect, what advice would you give for training block, like writer's block, but potentially arising in the absence of structured class time? Do you mean, so I can clarify, Kate, when you say a block, do you mean you're practicing and you're not making progress, or do you mean you're not practicing? So yeah, again, same thing, resistance to what? Do we mean, oh, not practicing, okay. Let me think how to answer that. Going back to what we were talking before about coaches, and I'm saying that one of the things is the modern idea of a coach is somebody that's motivating. You've got to motivate your students. And I don't agree. And it's not sustainable and it's artificial. Who the heck has motivation all the time? Sometimes I'm so motivated. I'm so on one. I'm just training for hours and hours. Some days I really can't be bothered. So here's the key. It's not about motivation. It's about discipline and habit. So I would start with something which is like they say, get a small win, right? So set a goal of doing 5 minutes practice a day. So it's something that's very, very easily achievable, but do it every day. So you're getting into a habit of practicing every day. Usually after 5 minutes, you're warmed up, and it's usually the hardest bit is getting started, right? But once you do it, it's easy to increase it 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Why would you practice? Because you can see the benefits, you can feel the benefits, and you can see your improvement. And those are your kind of intrinsic motivations for practicing. You ever feel like stiff and you just need to stretch? You want to have that feeling about your martial arts. Something's not right. I haven't practiced today. It just doesn't feel right. I want to do it. I have a friend and she just goes running all the time, and I have, man, 10K a day and all that. I'm like, oh man, how do you do that every day? Like, oh, I really need to run. I really don't. I really have trouble with that. No, I do run. I go for some runs a few times. You know, I say a few times a week sometimes. But it's not something I ever feel like I want to do. Okay. Whereas other people, like a dog, just feel like haven't had my run today. I just need to go out and run. It's very natural. So perhaps you need to find something that you feel like you want to do. If you really don't want to do it, maybe you don't want to do it. There's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone has to practice it every day. But if you really do, then do it. That's not very helpful, is it? But there's nothing more than that. I have 3 practice session program each week. So yeah, Mike's approach is to like pre-plan it and say, this is my, put it in your diary, put it on your phone. This is my time. Somebody wants to make an appointment. Sorry, that time's booked, and treat that time with yourself as sacred, as like that's as important as if I'd made that appointment with somebody else. I wouldn't dream of cancelling with that person. That's how important my training is to me. And if it is, it is. But I'm not saying it has to be. Right? Some people, it's not the priority. Who am I to say? But if you want it to be, if you say, I really, really, really want to practice every day, but I'm not, then why? Maybe there's a good reason. Think it through. Like, why don't I naturally want to? Because I'm thinking the same thing with my guitar practice. I'm not saying this to throw any accusations at you, Kate. I'm just sharing some stuff that I've been going through, because I don't practice my guitar very much. And I say, I really want to practice every day. And then like, if I did, I would practice every day, right? Something's going on there. Do you think society these days makes too much of motivation? Yes, it's a problem. It's an over exaggeration of the importance of the self. Okay, I joined the Waffle to find the way back in. It's horrid to fall off the regular practice. Coming back can feel tricksy. Hey, you know what? Good for you. You know, and to say that, you've already put that in. So well done. That's the hardest bit. But just come back. The door's always open, and the practice is always there, and the next breath is always there, and the next punch is always there. And once you start, you feel like you haven't stopped. So that's really my advice, is just do it. It's that Nike, just do it. A lot of coddling in general these days. Oh yeah, talking about the motivation and the coaching. Yes. See, my Sifu just never did that with me. Just never did it. If it's funny because people say about, I really want to learn the traditional way. I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. And I had this conversation with someone that quit recently. It's like, no, you don't. As soon as there's a criticism, boom, Teddy's thrown. I'm out. I quit. It's like, yeah, that's the problem. Everyone wants to be told it's okay. You're great. That's maybe what coaches are about. That's not what Sifus are about. Very helpful. Well, hopefully I helped a little. Thanks, Kate. But Barbara, make it into a habit in the morning. So that can be really powerful, isn't it? Like brushing your teeth, right? You wouldn't leave home without brushing your teeth. It's not something, it takes 2 minutes, and it's not something you make a big deal about. Oh no, I really want to brush my teeth every day, but I don't. What's the motivation for brushing your teeth? Maybe self-respect, wouldn't dream of going out without it. Or it's just a plain habit. It's just something I do. It's like the same thing with people that don't eat meat. It's like, is it a massive discipline? Is it something really, really difficult? Well, some people, they see it and they go, I just wouldn't. It's just not what I do. So even that isn't really a discipline. It's just an expression of their values. So we have to find a way of being congruent between our beliefs, our thoughts, our actions, our lifestyle, our character. That's a big, big deal. And I'm not saying that as a claiming that I've done that. Otherwise, it becomes more a stress trying. Yeah, it's something fake. Yes, Barbara and Mike, but even with making and structuring that time, life is not always predictable. No, it's not. It's not. I agree. Jonesy, the use of Lao Shi is becoming more common rather than Sifu. Your thoughts? In Canton, we call Lao Si. Lao Si is teacher, like a school teacher. So my Sifu would say, oh, this is Long Lao Si, learn from Learn 𝐿𝐶. She's very good. Okay, cool. But seafood, so you can have many 𝐿𝐶. That's the difference, I think. You can have many 𝐿𝐶. You only have one seafood. But again, if you're teaching in the UK, what the heck do people know between 𝐿𝐶 and seafood? I mean, it doesn't have the father character in it. So in Chinese, that's a deal. But if you're teaching Westerners, you're already using kind of weird, for us, weird Chinese, like exotic names anyway. So one's probably no more difficult than another from the culture. I mean, I'm not talking about in China. It's different. Thank you, Fu Jiao. Oh my goodness. You know what? I didn't even see the time. Whoa, have I been waffling for an hour? Good grief. But thank you for joining us. See you tomorrow on Zoom. Mike, lockdown has made it more predictable. Yeah, we're stuck, you know. How many people are going to come out of lockdown like less fit and heavier than when they went in? Most. How many people are going to say, right, we have this time, I'm going to get in the best shape of my life? Not many. I think not many. But it's the same time. We have the same time in the day. It's just the not in lockdown. Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm talking generally, Kate. I wasn't talking at you there. I'm just talking it generally. Training was much easier last spring. Yeah, Kate, what happens is life happens, right? Life gets in the way. I mean, I've been there. I've had a business. I've got, you know, I had two young kids. So, you know, they're grown up now. It's different. But yeah, life's unpredictable. I don't have the answer for you, I'm afraid, but just keep doing what you're doing, keep loving it and trying to get a daily habit and give yourself slack, but also try to program that practice time in your day. It's really important. And also, thanks, David, I'm down a stone. Well done, Mike. That's fantastic. I've lost the video completely and the sound. Oh, I'm sorry. I think what I'm going to do is, guys, because there's still 15 people managed to sit for an hour of this, so thank you for your patience. I'm going to end it there. We are on Zoom for the Academy members tomorrow. For those of you that are not in the Academy, back on Monday with the Taiji, and I'll be putting there's links below this if you want to go on the Thinkific, do a free course on Thinkific, and you'll also have access when I set it up to our community. That's completely free. If you want to support me, please support me by purchasing a course or sponsoring on Patreon. So thank you everyone who's done that. I love the Waffles and Company support my fellow wafflers. That's great. Thank you, Sally. It's a nice community. Thanks, Barnaby. It's going to call it there. Thanks, Sylvia. Thanks. Yeah, I don't know, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope people get something out of it. Thank you very much, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you.